The relentless sun of the New Mexico Territory hung high in a sky so pale it looked bleached of all color. It was July of 1875, a season of heat that settled into the bones and refused to leave. The air tasted of copper and dry earth, a flavor that Evelyn Hart was beginning to realize she would have to endure for the rest of her life. Around her, the stagecoach rattled and groaned, a wooden box tossing on a sea of uneven ruts. The vehicle smelled of old leather, sweat, and the stale tobacco smoke clinging to the coat of the man sleeping opposite her. Outside the window, the landscape was a vast, indifferent expanse of red rock and scrub brush, broken only by the occasional skeletal remains of a tree struck by lightning. This was the borderland, the jagged seam where the expanding ambition of the United States stitched itself clumsily into the ancient fabric of the Comanche territories. Evelyn pressed her gloved hand against the window frame to steady herself. She was 21 years old, though in the last 3 weeks of travel from Missouri, she felt she had aged a decade. Her reflection in the glass showed a pale face, violet shadows beneath eyes the color of hickory nuts, and a mouth set in a line of grim determination. She had been taught by her mother that a lady's greatest asset was her composure, and Evelyn held on to that lesson now like a drowning woman clutching a piece of driftwood. She was not traveling for pleasure. She was traveling to be a wife. The letter from her mother, currently folded into a tight square inside her reticule, had made the terms of her existence clear. Her father's mercantile business in St. Louis had collapsed under the weight of bad investments and the panic of 1873. Destitution was not a possibility. It was a certainty, looming over the Hart family like a thunderhead. The only shelter from the storm was Silas Greeley. Silas Greeley. The name felt heavy on her tongue. He was a man of 45, a friend of a distant cousin, who had made a fortune in cattle and land speculation out west. He wanted a wife from the East. He wanted refinement. He wanted, as the correspondents had explicitly stated, a woman of unblemished character and breeding to grace his table. In exchange, he would settle her father's debts. Evelyn was not merely a bride. She was the final transaction in her father's ledger. The coach slowed, the driver shouting a coarse command to the team of horses. The vehicle lurched to a halt beside a shallow, meandering creek shaded by a cluster of cottonwoods. "Water the horses, 15 minutes," the driver bellowed from the box. Evelyn needed to escape the stifling confinement of the coach. She opened the door and stepped down, her boots sinking into the red dust. The heat hit her with physical force, dry and searing. She walked away from the other passengers, a whiskey salesman and a silent older woman clutching a Bible, and moved toward the edge of the creek. She splashed water onto her face, heedless of the droplets spotting her travel dress. When she straightened and dried her hands on her handkerchief, she looked up toward the ridge of sandstone that overlooked the valley. That was when she saw him. He was sitting on a paint horse, motionless against the glare of the sun. He was a Comanche warrior, young and lean, his skin the color of burnished bronze. He wore no shirt, only buckskin leggings, and his black hair was pulled back, half-tied, lifting slightly in the hot breeze. He was too far away for her to see the color of his eyes, yet she felt the weight of his gaze as tangibly as a hand on her shoulder. Panic should have seized her. The newspapers in St. Louis were full of lurid tales of the savage frontier, of raids and scalpings, but Evelyn did not feel fear. She felt a strange, electric jolt of recognition. The warrior Nokoni, though she did not know his name, then sat with a stillness that the civilized world had forgotten. He did not look like a threat. He looked like a part of the landscape, as inevitable and enduring as the mesa. He held a bow loosely in one hand, not drawn, just resting. For a span of 10 seconds, they existed in a private silence amidst the noise of the driver cursing at the mules and the salesman spitting tobacco. The divide between them was more than distance. It was a chasm between two dying eras and two birthing nations. Evelyn, in her corsets and heavy skirts, represented everything that was coming to strangle the wildness out of this place. He represented the wildness itself. Then, with a subtle shift of his weight, he turned his horse. In a blink, he vanished behind the ridge. leaving nothing but the empty skyline. "Miss Hart, we are burning daylight!" the driver shouted. Evelyn swallowed hard, her heart hammering a rhythm against her ribs that had nothing to do with the heat. She turned back to the coach, but the image of the rider was burned into her mind, a silhouette of freedom that made the interior of the carriage feel more like a prison cell than ever before. By late afternoon, the town of Red Hollow emerged from the dust. It was a scar on the land, a collection of raw timber buildings and false fronts lining a single muddy street. The railway had not yet fully arrived, but its promise hung in the air. The ground was surveyed, and the sound of hammers echoed from the outskirts where the station was being erected. The coach pulled up in front of the largest hotel, and there, waiting on the boardwalk, was Silas Greeley. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick-chested, dressed in a suit of fine gray wool that seemed absurdly impractical for the climate. His face was clean-shaven, his hair slicked back with fragrant oil. As Evelyn descended the steps, Silas stepped forward, extending a hand that was manicured yet thick with calluses. "Miss Hart," he said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth like polished stones rolling in a riverbed. "Welcome home." Evelyn took his hand. His grip was firm, too firm. It was not a hold of affection, but of possession. His palm was dry and cool, a stark contrast to the feverish heat of the day. "Mr. Greeley," she replied, her voice steady. "It is a relief to arrive." He did not let go of her hand immediately. Instead, he pulled her slightly closer, his eyes sweeping over her from the brim of her bonnet to the hem of her dusty skirt. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, devoid of warmth. They assessed her as a rancher assesses a heifer at auction, checking for soundness of limb and quality of breeding. "You are dusty," he noted, a faint smile playing on his lips that did not reach his eyes. "But the Missouri descriptions did not do you justice. You will clean up beautifully." "Thank you," she murmured, fighting the urge to pull her hand away. "Come, my carriage is waiting. The ranch is 5 miles out. I will not have my bride staying in a hotel with drifters and cattle drovers." The ride to the Double G Ranch was silent. Silas sat opposite her in his private carriage, watching her. He owned the silence, filling the space with his bulk and his unyielding presence. "We have a dinner planned for Saturday," Silas said eventually, breaking the silence. "The engagement party. I've invited the sheriff, the mayor, and the investors from the railroad. It is important that you make a good impression. I shall do my best." "Sir," Evelyn said. "Silas," he corrected her softly. "You must call me Silas. And yes, you will do your best. My standing in this territory depends on order and image. A wild wife is of no use to a man in my position." The ranch house was a sprawling structure of adobe and timber, built to intimidate rather than to welcome. Inside, it was filled with heavy furniture imported from the East velvet settees that collected dust, mahogany tables that warped in the dry air. It felt like a museum, cold and lifeless. Evelyn was shown to a room on the second floor. It was luxurious by frontier standards, with a 4-poster bed and a window that looked out over the corrals. But as the door clicked shut, Evelyn felt the walls closing in. She went to the window and looked out. Beyond the fences, beyond the cultivated grasp of Silas Greeley, lay the open prairie, turning purple in the twilight. Somewhere out there was the warrior she had seen. Somewhere out there was air she could breathe. Later that evening, Evelyn sat at the vanity, reading her mother's letter for the 100th time. "My dearest Evelyn, do not let your foolish romantic notions ruin this. Your father is a broken man. The creditors are circling like vultures. Mr. Greeley is a generous savior. Be a good wife. Be obedient. Do not make a scene. Remember, you are saving us all." She folded the letter and blew out the candle. Sitting in the darkness. Obedience. That was the currency with which she bought her family's survival. The next few days were a blur of preparations. The engagement party was to be a spectacle, a declaration of Silas Greeley's dominance over Red Hollow. He was not just marrying a woman, he was importing aristocracy. On Thursday, The dress arrived. It had been shipped separately from St. Louis, packed in layers of tissue paper and cedar chips. Silas insisted on being present when Martha, the elderly housekeeper, opened the crate in the parlor. It was a mountain of white silk and lace, intricate and suffocatingly beautiful, high-necked, long-sleeved, with a bustle that would make sitting difficult and riding impossible. "Pure white," Silas said, reaching out to touch the fabric. His fingers lingered on the bodice. "A symbol. That is what I told the boys at the saloon. I told them I bought the finest thing from Missouri. A virgin bride, untouched, unspoiled." Evelyn stood rigid as Martha held the dress up against her. She felt Silas's eyes boring into her skin, stripping away the layers of cotton and wool. His words made her skin crawl. Bought. He had used the word without shame. "It is lovely," Evelyn said, her voice hollow. "It is necessary," Silas replied, turning to pour himself a glass of brandy. "The railroad men, they need to see stability. They need to see that civilization has taken root here. A man with a wild family cannot be trusted with a depot contract. A man with a pure, obedient wife. That is a man who controls his world." He took a sip, his eyes narrowing. "There is talk in town. The Comanches are getting restless again, stealing horses, cutting fences. Sheriff Miller says we might need to push the boundary line back another 10 miles. Clear out the valley." "Is that fair?" Evelyn asked before she could stop herself. "If it is their land." The room went deadly silent. Silas lowered his glass slowly. He walked toward her, the sound of his boots heavy on the floorboards. He stopped inches from her face, smelling of expensive liquor and hair oil. "Fair is what the strong decide. Evelyn," he said softly, "do not mistake their savagery for ownership. They are weeds in a garden, and I am the gardener." He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his thumb grazing her jawline. The touch was possessive, threatening. "Do not speak of things you do not understand. You are here to look beautiful and bear heirs. Leave the land to the men." He turned and walked out, leaving Evelyn trembling in the center of the room. Martha, the housekeeper, began to fold the dress back into the box. The old woman's face was unreadable, her dark skin creased like ancient leather. She did not look at Evelyn, but she murmured, low and rough, "Best learn to nod. Child, just nod." The day before the wedding, the town of Red Hollow was buzzing. The heat had not broken, and the air was thick with tension. Evelyn had been brought into town to meet the Reverend at the small, whitewashed church, while Silas was inside discussing the ceremony fees with the clergyman. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch to catch a breath of air. The church sat on a slight rise, overlooking the main street and the livery stable below. 2 men were leaning against the side of the stable, passing a flask between them. The hot wind carried their voices up to where Evelyn stood hidden by the trellis of wilting ivy. "Greeley's throwing a hell of a party," one man said, wiping his mouth with a dirty sleeve. "Champagne from Chicago. I heard he can afford it." The other laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "After the deal he swindled out of the McKinnon widow. Bought her 300 acres for the price of a mule. Well, he needs a new wife to put in that big house. It's been empty too long." "Not that long," the first man said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Only 2 years since the last one died." "Died," the second man snorted. "That's what the coroner wrote. Fall from a horse. I saw her the week before. She was terrified of horses. Wouldn't go near a foal, let alone ride a stallion. Keep your mouth shut. Jeb, you want to end up like the first one that fever took her mighty quick, too." "I'm just saying," the man muttered. "Greeley collects things. Land, money, wives. And when he's done with them, hush up. Here comes the sheriff." Evelyn backed away from the trellis, her blood running cold. She pressed her back against the rough wood of the church wall, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Third wife. The letter from her mother had not mentioned previous wives. Silas had never mentioned them. "Fall from a horse." She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. The feeling of unease that had shadowed her since Missouri suddenly solidified into a terrified certainty. She was not just a pawn in a financial transaction. She was entering a slaughterhouse. The church door opened, and Silas emerged, smiling benevolently at the Reverend. He looked at the picture of a pillar of the community, a builder, a leader. "Ah, Evelyn," he said, seeing her standing there. He walked over and placed his hand on the small of her back. The heat of his palm seemed to burn through her dress. "Ready to go?" "We have much to do. Tomorrow is the beginning of your new life." Evelyn looked up at him. She saw the cold calculation in his pale eyes. She saw the way he looked past her, toward the horizon, toward the land he wanted to conquer. "Yes, Silas," she lied, her voice steady despite the terror gripping her heart. "I am ready." But as he guided her toward the carriage, her eyes darted toward the distant red hills, toward the place where she had seen the Comanche warrior. The town felt like a trap, the church like a cage, and the man beside her like a warden. The sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the dirt street. Somewhere out there, the coyotes began to howl, a wild, mournful sound that spoke of hunger and survival. Evelyn's heart tightened her grip on her skirt. She realized then that she could not be the dutiful daughter anymore. If she wanted to survive Silas Greeley, she would have to find the courage she had only ever dreamed of in her childhood stories. The virgin bride was a role she was playing, but beneath the silk and the fear, something else was waking up, something desperate. As the carriage rolled out of town, passing the saloon where the piano clinked a discordant tune, Evelyn looked at the darkened window reflection. She did not see her wife. She saw a fugitive waiting. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 o'clock in the morning, the sound heavy and ominous in the silent house. Evelyn's heart stood at the top of the stairs, her hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She should have been asleep. Tomorrow was her wedding day, the day she would become Mrs. Silas Greeley and secure her family's salvation. But sleep had been chased away by a gnawing anxiety that felt more like instinct than nerves. She had descended the stairs in her nightgown, intending to find a glass of water in the kitchen to soothe her parched throat. A sliver of light, yellow and faint, spilled from under the heavy oak doors of Silas's study. Voices drifted out, low and murmuring, but in the stillness of the night, they carried with terrifying clarity. Evelyn crept closer, her bare feet silent on the rug. "The deed to the Missouri property is secured." Then, it was Silas's voice. It lacked the warm, booming quality he used in public. Here, stripped of an audience, it was flat and cold, the voice of a man counting inventory. "Secured and filed, Mr. Greeley," came the reply. It was Mr. Finch, his lawyer, a man with ink-stained fingers and shifty eyes, though the Hart family believes it is merely held as collateral until the debts are forgiven. "Let them believe it," Silas chuckled, a dry sound like dry leaves scraping together. "Once the marriage license is signed tomorrow, her assets become my assets. The Missouri land sits directly on the proposed spur line for the Union Pacific. Selling it will triple what I paid to bail out her incompetent father." Evelyn pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her father was not incompetent. He was desperate. And Silas was not a savior. He was a vulture. "And the girl, Mr.?" Finch asked. "She seems spirited. You generally prefer them more broken." "She is young. She will learn," Silas replied, the sound of ice clinking against glass following his words. "And if she does not, well, the frontier is a dangerous place. Finch, women are fragile creatures out here. My second wife had weak lungs, perhaps Mrs. Hart Greeley will suffer a riding accident or a fever. Give it 3 years. By then, the railroad deal will be finalized." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees trembled, threatening to buckle. "Besides," Silas added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr that made Evelyn's skin crawl, "having a virgin bride from the East makes me look respectable to the railroad company board members. They like traditional values. They like a man who brings civilization to the savages. Once she has served that purpose, she becomes redundant. Evelyn backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was not a wife to him. She was a signature on a deed. She was a temporary prop to be discarded when her utility expired. The realization shattered the fragile glass cage of duty she had built around herself. Remaining here was not a sacrifice. It was a suicide. She turned and fled back up the stairs, no longer caring about silence, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She reached the landing just as the study door creaked open. "Who is there?" Silas called out. Evelyn froze. She was trapped in the shadow of the hallway. She forced herself to turn, smoothing her features into a mask of sleepy confusion. "It is only me, Silas," she said, her voice shaking despite her best effort. I could not sleep. I needed water." Silas stepped into the light. He was still dressed in his evening suit, though his tie was loosened. He looked up at her, his eyes narrowing. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step a deliberate thud. When he reached her, the smell of brandy and cigar smoke was overpowering. "Nerves?" he asked, examining her face. "Yes," she lied. "Just nerves. I miss my home." "This is your home now," Silas said. He reached out and took her arm. His grip was shocking in its intensity. His fingers dug into her bicep, pressing hard enough to bruise. It was not a caress. It was a shackle. "You have nowhere else to go. Evelyn, Missouri is 1,000 miles away, and your father has nothing left. You are mine, completely." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. "Do not wander the house at night. It implies a lack of discipline. Go to bed." He released her, and the sensation of his cold fingers lingered on her skin like a burn. Evelyn fled to her room, locking the door behind her with trembling hands. She leaned against the wood, sliding down until she hit the floor. The tears came then, hot and angry. "I cannot do this," she whispered to the empty room. "I cannot let him kill me." A soft scratching at the connecting door startled her. Before she could react, the door opened, and Martha, the head housekeeper, slipped inside. The older woman held a kerosene lamp low, casting long shadows across her lined face. "I saw your face in the hall, child," Martha whispered, setting the lamp on the vanity. "And I heard the master's voice. You heard him too, did you not?" Evelyn looked up, wiping her eyes. He plans to be rid of me. Once he has the land." Martha nodded grimly. She moved to the wardrobe and began pulling things out. "He is a man who eats souls. Miss Evelyn, I have watched him bury 2 wives. The first one cried herself to fade. The second one tried to fight him, and she ended up broken at the bottom of the ravine. You have a fire in you. I saw it when you arrived. Do not let him snuff it out." "What can I do?" Evelyn asked, despair choking her voice. "He owns the sheriff. He owns the town." "Then you leave the town," Martha said firmly. She pulled a worn leather satchel from under her apron and pressed it into Evelyn's hands. "I have been saving this. It is not much, but there are silver dollars enough for food. There is a canteen of water and some dried beef. Leave." Evelyn stood up. "Where?" "West," Martha said, pointing to the window. "Follow the North Star until it dips. Then cut toward the jagged ridge. There is a pass. It leads away from the roads his men patrol." "That is Comanche territory," Evelyn breathed. "Everyone says it is death to go there." "It is death to stay here," Martha countered, her dark eyes fierce. "The Comanche might kill you, or they might not. Silas Greeley will kill you for certain. Choose your poison, girl." Martha moved with surprising speed. She handed Evelyn a heavy wool coat that belonged to one of the stable hands. "Put this on. It will get cold, and you must take the mare in the back paddock. She is skittish, but she is fast. The guards are all at the bunkhouse, drunk on the whiskey, mister. Greeley sent down for the celebration. You have 1 hour before the moon sets." Evelyn looked at the wedding dress hanging on the dress formed the symbol of her sail. She made a decision. She stripped off her nightgown and stepped into the white silk dress. It was unfinished at the hem, dragging slightly, but it was sturdy. "Why that?" Martha asked. "Because I have no other riding clothes," Evelyn said, buttoning the bodice with shaking fingers. "And because if I die out there, I want to be wearing the price he paid for me." She pulled the rough wool coat over the delicate silk, the contrast scratching against her neck. She shoved her feet into her riding boots, grabbed the satchel, and hugged Martha. "Thank you," Evelyn sobbed. "Go!" Martha pushed her toward the balcony door. "Run, child, run, and do not look back." Evelyn climbed down the trellis, the vines tearing at her hands. The night air was thick with heat and the smell of sage. She crept toward the back paddock, the white of her skirt bunching in her hands to keep it from rustling. The bunkhouse was rowdy with laughter and the discordant sound of a fiddle, covering the sound of her footsteps. The little mare snorted when Evelyn entered the stall, but she calmed her with a whispered word and a stroke on the nose. Evelyn saddled her quickly, her movements fueled by adrenaline. She led the horse out the back gate, waiting until they were 100 yards clear of the fence line before mounting. She kicked the horse into a gallop. The wind roared in her ears, tearing the pins from her hair. Her long brown locks whipped behind her, and the coat flapped open, revealing the ghostly white of the wedding dress beneath. Under the light of the full moon, she looked like a specter fleeing a graveyard. She rode hard, putting the ranch house behind her, riding toward the wild, terrifying darkness of the open prairie. Morning broke with a violence typical of the desert, the sun bleeding red over the horizon. At the Double G Ranch, the silence of the morning was shattered by a roar of rage. Silas Greeley stood in Evelyn's bedroom, his chest heaving. The bed was unslept. The wardrobe was open. The window was unlatched. "She is gone!" he bellowed, sweeping a porcelain vase off the vanity. It shattered against the wall, the sound like a gunshot. Conrad Hale stood in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. He was a lean, scarred man who wore his gun belt low. He was Silas's shadow, the man who did the work that kept Silas's hands clean. "Tracks lead west," Conrad said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. "Looks like she took the little mare. One horse, one rider." "She heard us," Silas hissed, gripping the edge of the dresser until the wood creaked. "That little spy. She heard us last night." He turned to Conrad, his face purple with humiliation. "I have the governor coming next month. I have the railroad board. I cannot be the man whose bride ran away on his wedding day. It makes me look weak. It makes me look like a fool." "You want me to bring her back?" Conrad asked. "I want you to hunt her down," Silas commanded. "Take the boys. Do not stop until you find her." He paused, his eyes becoming cold and dead. "If she comes back screaming and telling stories, it ruins everything. Bring her back. Being alive is good. We can say she was delirious with fever. But if she fights, well, the desert is a dangerous place. A fall from a horse, a snake bite. Dead is better than the town knowing the truth." Conrad nodded slowly, a cruel smile touching his lips. "Consider it done, boss." Evelyn had been riding for 6 hours. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a grueling exhaustion and a thirst that coated her throat in dust. The sun was a physical weight on her shoulders. She had discarded the heavy wool coat miles back, unable to bear the heat, leaving her in the white wedding dress. The silk was now stained with red dirt and torn at the hem, a ruined symbol of her ruined reputation. She had followed Martha's directions, keeping the sun to her right, aiming for the jagged teeth of the distant mountains. But the landscape was deceptive. What looked like a mile away stretched into 10. The terrain had changed from flat scrub to rocky, uneven foothills. She was lost. She knew it in the pit of her stomach. This was not the edge of the territory. She had ridden deep into the heart of the emptiness. This was the land the people in Red Hollow whispered about, the land of the Comanche. Every shadow behind a boulder looked like a warrior. Every rustle of dry grass sounded like an arrow being nocked. "Just keep moving," she whispered to the mare, her voice cracking. "Just a little further." The horse was foaming at the mouth, stumbling over loose shale. They were navigating a narrow game trail that wound along the side of a steep canyon. Below, a dry riverbed snaked through the rocks, looking like a scar on the earth. Evelyn wiped sweat from her eyes. She reached for the canteen, but her fingers were slippery. As she fumbled, the mare stepped on a sliding rock. It happened in a heartbeat. The rock gave way. The horse panicked, rearing up and twisting sideways. Evelyn screamed as she was thrown from the saddle. The world spun blue sky, red rock, white silk all blurring together. She hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs, but she did not stop. The slope was steep, and she rolled, tumbling down through the brush and sharp stones. Branches whipped her face. Rocks tore at the delicate fabric of her dress and the skin beneath. She grasped frantically for a handhold, her fingers finding only loose gravel. She slammed into a flat shelf of rock 20 feet down, her head striking the stone with a sickening thud. Pain exploded behind her eyes, brilliant and blinding. Then, the world went gray. The sound of the horse scrambling back up the trail faded into a dull buzzing. She lay there, a broken doll in a tattered wedding dress, sprawled on the red earth. Time lost its meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. The sun began to dip, casting the canyon into long, cool shadows. Evelyn groaned, a low, guttural sound. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it a throbbing agony in her temple and a sharp, stabbing pain in her left ankle. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and failed. She blinked, trying to clear the haze from her vision. There was a smell of wood smoke. She forced her eyes open. A fire was crackling a few yards away, tucked under the overhang of the canyon wall, and between her and the fire, crouched on his heels, was a man. He was the warrior. The one from the ridge. Nokoni looked at her. Up close, his face was striking high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were dark pools of obsidian. He was not looking at her with the predatory gaze of Silas, nor the dismissal of her father. He looked at her with a calm, intense curiosity, as one might look at a strange bird that had fallen from the sky. He reached out a hand, holding a damp cloth. Evelyn tried to scramble back, terror seizing her heart. "No," she rasped, her voice a broken whisper. "Please." Nokoni paused. He did not advance. He simply watched her, the firelight dancing across his bronze skin. "You are broken," he said. His English was accented, slow and deep. "Do not move." Evelyn stared at him, her heart pounding against her bruised ribs. She had fled a monster only to fall at the feet of a legend. But as darkness swallowed the canyon, and the first star appeared in the sliver of sky above, she realized with a terrifying clarity that she had no strength left to run. She was alone in the wilderness, miles from civilization, lying in the dirt in a ruined wedding dress, staring into the eyes of a Comanche warrior. Her old life was dead. Whatever happened next would be a story written in blood and dust. Her vision blurred again, and she let the darkness take her. The image of his stoic face, the last thing she saw before she slipped back into unconsciousness. The transition from the void of unconsciousness to the waking world was not gentle. It came as a throbbing ache in Evelyn's temples and the sharp, medicinal sting of something cool pressed against her forehead. She blinked, her eyelids feeling as heavy as lead weights. The blinding white sun she remembered was gone, replaced by the flickering, amber glow of a small fire. Above her, rock curved like a protective hand, a shallow cave or overhang. The air smelled of wood smoke, dry sage, and the musky scent of cured leather. Evelyn tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pushed her back down against the furs beneath her. She gasped, her hand flying to her head. Her fingers brushed against a rough bandage made of crushed leaves and strips of cloth. "Do not move," a voice said. It was deep, resonant, and calm. She froze. Memory returned in a jagged rush, the flight from the ranch, the endless red expanse, the fall, the pain. She turned her head slowly, wincing. Nokoni sat on the other side of the fire, perhaps 6 feet away. He was whittling a piece of wood with a long knife, his movements precise and rhythmic. He did not look up immediately, allowing her a moment to absorb his presence. He had removed his leggings, wearing only a breechcloth, and the firelight danced over the smooth, copper expanse of his chest and arms. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in Evelyn's chest. Every lurid dime novel she had ever read, every whisper from the women in St. Louis about the brutality of the frontier, screamed at her to run. She scrambled backward, her boots scraping against the stone floor, until her back hit the cold rock wall. She pulled the tattered remains of her white wedding dress around her legs, a futile shield. Noconi stopped whittling. He looked up, his dark eyes catching the firelight. He did not smile, nor did he scowl. His expression was one of absolute neutrality, like the face of a mountain looking down at a storm. "You are awake," he said. His English was slow, the vowels elongated, but clear. "Good. Who are you?" Evelyn stammered, her voice raspy from thirst. "What are you going to do to me?" Noconi set the knife down on a flat stone. He picked up a water skin and tossed it gently across the fire. It landed near her feet with a soft thud. "Drink," he commanded softly. "Then ask questions." Evelyn stared at the water skin. Thirst won over fear. She grabbed it, unstoppered the cork, and drank greedily. The water was cool and tasted faintly of the earth, but it was the best thing she had ever consumed. She lowered the bag, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, and looked at him again. "My name is Noconi," he said. "You fell. The horse was scared by a snake. I carried you here." "You are Comanche," she whispered. "I am Numunu," he corrected gently, using his people's word for themselves. "The white men call us Comanche. It means enemy." He paused, studying her face. "Do you see an enemy, white woman?" Evelyn trembled. She looked at the knife he had set aside. "They say, in the town, they say you steal women, that you kill them." Noconi let out a short, sharp breath, not quite a laugh, but a dismissal. He picked up a stick and poked the fire, sending a shower of sparks toward the cave roof. "The townspeople say many things to hide their own sins. I do not need a white wife. I have no need for more trouble than the blue-coat soldiers already bring." He looked her directly in the eye. "I only did not want the wolves to eat you. It is a bad death." The blunt practicality of his words disarmed her more than any reassurance could have. He was not looking at her with desire or malice. He was looking at her as a problem he had solved, like a broken wheel or a stray calf. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "For saving me." He nodded once, accepting the gratitude. "Your head is hard, but the cut is deep. I put sage and mud to stop the bleeding. You must rest." "I cannot rest," Evelyn said, anxiety surging again. "I have to keep going. If they find me—" "Who?" Noconi asked. His gaze sharpened. "Who hunts a woman in a spirit dress out here in the deep grass?" Evelyn hesitated. She looked at the fire, then back at him. If she told him she was the wife of Silas Greeley, the richest man in the territory, would he ransom her? Would he use her as a bargaining chip? The memory of Silas's cold eyes and the mention of his dead wives made her shiver. She could not risk being sent back. "A man," she said carefully. "A cruel man. I was to marry him today, but I ran away." "A husband who beats his horse will beat his wife," Noconi observed, as if stating a universal truth. "You were right to run, but you ran into the hawk's nest to escape the snake. I did not know where else to go." "Clearly," he said. He reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out a strip of dried meat. He offered it to her. "Eat tomorrow. If your head is clear, you walk. I have no horse for you." Yours ran back to the herd. Evelyn took the meat. It was tough and salty, but she chewed it slowly, watching him. "You are alone?" she asked. "Where is your tribe?" A shadow passed over Noconi's face, a flicker of old pain that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "My family is gone," he said. "The soldiers came 3 winters ago. Now, I ride with a small band, young men. We live where the reservations cannot catch us. We live in the old way." He fell silent, and Evelyn sensed a wall going up. He was a man who had seen his world burn. Yet he had stopped to pull a woman of the enemy race from a ravine. The complexity of it confused her, challenging everything she had been taught. The night deepened. Outside the small circle of firelight, the desert was alive with sounds. Crickets chirped a rhythmic cadence, and the wind whispered through the scrub brush. Then, a new sound cut through the darkness. A howl, long, mournful, and terrifyingly close. Then another, answering from the ridge above them. Evelyn dropped the piece of meat, scrambling closer to the fire. Wolves! Nokoni did not flinch. He reached for his bow, which lay beside him, and knocked an arrow in a single, fluid motion. "They smell the blood from your head," he said quietly. "Stay by the light." He stood up and moved to the edge of the overhang. Evelyn watched, mesmerized. He did not look like a man defending a campsite. He looked like a guardian spirit. He let out a shout, a guttural, piercing cry that echoed off the canyon walls. He stomped his foot, kicking sand outward, and drew the bowstring taut. From the darkness, a pair of yellow eyes reflected the firelight. Then another pair. The pack was testing them. Nokoni shouted again, this time waving the burning end of a stick he had pulled from the fire. "Go!" he yelled in English, followed by a string of harsh words in his own tongue. The yellow eyes blinked and vanished. The pack, sensing that this prey had teeth, melted back into the night. Nokoni tossed the stick back into the fire and sat down, his heart rate seemingly unchanged. "They are gone," he said. "For now." Evelyn let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "You are not afraid of them. Fear makes you taste good to them," Nokoni said, looking at her. "Respect them, but do not fear them. The wolf takes only what is weak." Evelyn pulled her knees to her chest. "I feel very weak." "You rode into the burning lands alone," Nokoni said. "You survived the fall. You are not a weak white woman. You are just new." The second day brought a heat that was even more punishing than the first. Evelyn's ankle was swollen and blue, making walking impossible. Nokoni spent the morning gathering roots and checking the perimeter of their small canyon hideout. He brought her water and silently reapplied the poultice to her head. By late afternoon, the sky began to change. The relentless blue turned a bruised purple in the west. The wind picked up, shifting from a breeze to a steady, moaning gale that whipped grit into Evelyn's eyes. "Storm," Nokoni said, looking at the horizon. "Big wind. It comes fast." He moved quickly, securing the leather skins he used for shelter, weighting them down with heavy stones. He gestured for Evelyn to move deeper into the wedge where the rock wall met the ground. "Cover your face," he ordered, pulling a woolen blanket from his pack. Within 10 minutes, the world disappeared. A wall of red dust slammed into the canyon. The light was extinguished, replaced by a suffocating crimson twilight. The noise was deafening, a roar like a rushing train that swallowed all other sounds. Sand stung Evelyn's skin like 1,000 needles. They huddled under the low ceiling of the rock, the leather tarp flapping violently against the stone. Nokoni sat with his back to the wind, using his body to shield the small fire that was their only source of comfort. As night fell, the temperature plummeted. It was a desert paradox, burning days and freezing nights. The wind stripped the heat from the air, and the dust storm blocked out the moon. Evelyn shivered violently. Her wedding dress, torn and thin, offered no protection against the biting cold. Her teeth began to chatter, a sound that seemed loud in the small space. The fire sputtered, fighting a losing battle against the wind. Nokoni looked at her. He saw her turning pale, her lips taking on a bluish tint. He moved closer, shifting on his knees. "The fire is dying," he said, his voice raised over the wind. "The wood is gone, and I cannot go out to find more. You will freeze. I will be fine," Evelyn stammered, wrapping her arms around herself. "You will not," Nokoni said flatly. "You have lost blood. The cold will take you before the sun returns." He hesitated for a moment, looking at her with that same intense, assessing gaze. Then he made a decision. He opened the heavy buffalo robe he had wrapped around his own shoulders. "Come," he said. "We must share heat." Evelyn stiffened. Every lesson of propriety, every sermon she had heard in the Missouri church, screamed in protest. A woman did not lie with a man who was not her husband, especially not a savage, especially not in the dark. "I cannot," she whispered. "Is your pride worth your life?" Noconi asked. "This is not a marriage bed. It is survival. If you stay there, you die. If you come here, you live. Choose." Evelyn looked at him. She saw the patience in his eyes, devoid of the hunger she had seen in Silas. Silas had touched her arm, and she had felt owned. Noconi was offering her a choice. She thought of the cold grave Silas had prepared for her. She thought of the freedom she had tasted when she galloped away from the ranch. She crawled toward him. Noconi lifted the heavy fur, and she slid underneath it, pressing herself against his side. He wrapped the robe tight around them both, cocooning them against the howling wind. The heat of his body was shocking. He was like a furnace. Evelyn stiffened at the first contact, her back rigid against his chest. His arm came around her, not to grope, but to hold the blanket in place. His hand rested on her shoulder, heavy and steady. "Breathe," he whispered near her ear. "I am not a bear. I will not bite." Slowly, agonizingly, Evelyn forced her muscles to relax. The shivering began to subside as his warmth seeped into her frozen limbs. She could smell him wood smoke, earth, and clean sweat. It was the scent of life. For a long time, they lay in silence, listening to the wind scream outside their fragile shelter. "Why did you save me?" Evelyn asked softly into the darkness. "You could have left me. My grandfather taught me that all life is sacred," Noconi replied, his voice rumbling against her back. "Even the life of the enemy. Besides, you looked very brave, riding a white horse in a white dress into the desert, like a spirit seeking home." "I was not brave," Evelyn confessed. "I was terrified." "Fear and bravery are brothers," he said. They walked together. She turned in his arms, shifting so she could see his face in the dying embers of the fire. Their faces were inches apart. She could see the strong line of his nose, the curve of his lips. "My name is Evelyn," she whispered. "I did not tell you before." "Evelyn," he repeated. The name sounded different when he said it softer, less sharp. A strange tension filled the small space under the buffalo robe. It was not the fear of earlier. It was something magnetic. Evelyn became acutely aware of his breathing, of the slow, steady beat of his heart against her ribs. She looked at his mouth. For the first time in her life, she felt a pull that was entirely her own. It was not dictated by duty or debt. It was a raw, human need for connection in the midst of a storm. She reached up, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his cheek. His skin was warm and smooth. Noconi went very still, his eyes searching hers. He did not pull away, nor did he push forward. He waited. Evelyn closed the distance. She pressed her lips to his. It was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark. His lips were soft, surprising her. He tasted of the wild, of the wind. When he kissed her back, it was with a gentle firmness that made her breath hitch. There was no desperation, no grasping. His hand moved from her shoulder to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her tangled hair. Holding her close, Evelyn felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the buffalo robe. It was the warmth of being seen, of being held not as a possession, but as a person. They broke the kiss but did not move apart. Evelyn rested her forehead against his chin, listening to the wind. For the first time in 21 years, she felt safe. Not safe because of walls or money, but safe because she was with someone who respected her strength. "Sleep, Evelyn," Noconi whispered. "The storm will pass." She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she slept without nightmares. The morning sun was brilliant and unforgiving, slicing through the crack in the rocks. The wind had died, leaving the canyon silent and buried in a layer of fine red dust. Evelyn woke slowly. She was alone under the buffalo robe. She sat up, panic flaring for a brief second before memory washed over her. The storm, the cold, the kiss. She looked around. Nokoni was standing near the entrance of the overhang, scanning the horizon. He looked back when he heard her stir. There was no awkwardness in his gaze, no leering triumph, but there was a shift, a recognition. Evelyn touched her lips. She expected to feel shame. Her mother would have called her a fallen woman. The church would have called her lost. But as she sat there, wrapping the fur around her shoulders, she felt lighter. The crushing weight of being pure for Silas Greeley was gone. She belonged to herself now, and she had shared that self willingly. "The wind has covered our tracks," Nokoni said, his voice practical. "But the dust will settle soon." "About last night," Evelyn began, her face flushing slightly. "Last night, we shared breath." Nokoni said simply, "We kept the cold away. I do not own you, Evelyn. You do not own me. We are two people walking under the sun, that is all." Evelyn smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Thank you. Nokoni." He nodded, but then his body became rigid. He tilted his head, listening to something Evelyn could not hear. "What is it?" she asked. "Thunder," he murmured. "No, not thunder." He dropped to a crouch, pressing his ear to the stone wall of the canyon. A moment later, he stood up, his face grim. "Rifles," he said, "far away, but coming this way." Evelyn scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ankle. "Silas?" she whispered. "He sent men?" Nokoni looked at her. "You said he was just a husband." "Ordinary men do not send riders this deep into the Comancheria with rifles. You have a story you are not telling me." "He is powerful," Evelyn admitted, guilt piercing her. "He will kill you if he finds us." "He will try," Nokoni corrected. He looked at the vast open plain beyond their shelter, then back at her. "I cannot leave you here. If they find you, they take you back. If they do not find you, the desert takes you." "I cannot go back," Evelyn said, her voice rising with desperation. "I would rather die here." Nokoni slung his quiver over his shoulder. He kicked dirt over the remains of their fire, erasing the sign of their camp. He walked over to her and offered his arm for support. "Then we do not go back," he said, "and we do not stay here. I know a place, the Canyon of Whispers. The horses of the white men cannot follow the path there. It is a secret way." "You would take me there?" Evelyn asked. "To your secret places. You shared my fire," Nokoni said, his dark eyes serious. "You are not a stranger anymore. Come, we must walk before the dust clears." Evelyn took his arm. It was strong and steady. As they stepped out from the shelter into the blinding morning light, she did not look back at the way she had come. She looked forward, toward the jagged mountains and the unknown, walking beside the warrior who had given her the first true choice of her life. Back in Red Hollow, the morning sun did not bring light. It brought a fever. Silas Greeley stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, his gray suit immaculate, a stark contrast to the dust-caked men gathering in the street. He held his hat in his hands, his head bowed in a performance of grief so calculated it was almost art. "It was the Comanches," Silas announced, his deep voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "My sentries found the tracks. They came in the night like thieves and took her, my bride, a girl who had not yet spent one night under this sky." A ripple of anger moved through the townspeople. It was a familiar fear, one that Silas knew exactly how to stoke. "She is innocent," Silas continued, lifting his head to reveal eyes that shimmered with what looked like unshed tears, but was merely the glint of malice. "A flower from Missouri, and they have dragged her into the wilderness. You know what they do to white women. You know the savagery." Sheriff Miller, a man whose spine had long ago been bought with Greeley's money, stepped forward, hitching up his gun belt. "We are forming a posse. Mister, Greeley is offering a reward, $500 for the girl's return, and for every brave person who resists. Well, the territory pays a bounty on scalps." The crowd roared. It was the sound of a mob finding a target for their heat-induced madness. Silas stepped back into the shadows of the office. his expression hardening instantly. Conrad Hales was waiting there, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. "You know she wasn't taken," Conrad said, his voice a low rasp. "She took the horse. She ran. The truth is irrelevant." "Conrad," Silas snapped. "What matters is the narrative. If she ran, I am a fool who cannot control his woman. If she was taken, I am a martyr, a victim of the savage threat. It justifies clearing out the valley. It justifies the railroad expansion." He walked to the window, watching the men saddle their horses. "Besides, if the Comanches kill her before you get there, it saves me the trouble. But if you find her alive, Conrad, remember my instructions. She must be in shock, delirious, unable to speak of what she heard in my study. Do you understand?" Conrad sheathed his knife with a sharp click. "Loud and clear. Boss, we will bring her back, or we will bring back a body to weep over." The Canyon of Whispers lived up to its name. The wind here did not howl. It hissed, sliding through narrow fissures in the red rock like a snake through dry grass. Evelyn walked behind Noconi, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her ankle throbbed with every step, a dull rhythm of pain that she tried to ignore. Noconi stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Evelyn froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What is it?" she whispered. "Listen," he commanded. At first, she heard nothing but the wind. Then, faint and distant, came the sound. It was not the organic sound of nature. It was the rhythmic clatter of shod hooves on stone, iron striking rock. "They are close," Noconi said, his face grim. "Too close. They are tracking the mare's scent, even though she is long gone." He turned to look at her. The curiosity she had seen in his eyes the night before had been replaced by a hard, cold suspicion. He grabbed her arm, pulling her into the shadow of a twisted juniper tree. "Why?" he demanded. "I told you," Evelyn stammered. "My husband—" "No," Noconi cut her off, his voice sharp. "I have seen posses before. I have seen men chase runaway wives. They send the sheriff. They send a brother. They do not send 20 men with repeating rifles. They do not ride horses until they foam and die just to retrieve a woman." He stepped closer, his dark eyes boring into hers. "You are dangerous. Evelyn Hart. You carry a storm with you. Why are they so desperate? What are you to them?" Evelyn looked at him. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the hand hovering near his knife. He thought she was a spy. He thought she was leading the slaughter to his doorstep. "They are not just coming for me," she admitted, her voice trembling. "They are coming for what I know." She fumbled with the pockets of her tattered dress, pulling out the folded papers she had shoved there in her panic at the ranch house papers she had snatched from Silas's desk while he was pouring his brandy. Just seconds before she ran back upstairs. She had grabbed them on instinct, hoping they were money, only realizing later what they were. "Look," she said, thrusting the crumpled documents at him. "Can you read the white man's words?" Noconi took the papers. He looked at the dense, looping script. "I learned to read at the mission school," he said bitterly, "before I ran away." He scanned the pages, his brow furrowed. "Union Pacific, land deed, Hart family transfer." He looked up, his expression darkening. "This is a sale of the valley." "My valley?" Evelyn said, tears stinging her eyes. "My father's land in Missouri, and the land Silas wants here. He plans to use the marriage to take legal ownership, and then—" She choked on the words. "And then he plans to kill me. An accident, a fall from a horse, or a fever." Noconi stared at her, the papers crinkling in his grip. "He murders you for land." "He murders me for a railroad stop," Evelyn corrected, anger finally overtaking her fear. "He needs a widower's sympathy and a clean title. He calls me his virgin bride, but I am just a signature to him. That is why they are coming. Noconi, if I live, his plan fails. If I speak, he hangs. He needs me dead or silent." Noconi looked toward the canyon entrance, where the sound of the pursuit was growing louder. A mix of rage and exhaustion crossed his face. "So," he said, his voice low and dangerous, The white man's greed follows me even here. I save a bird, and I get the hunter." He threw the papers back at her. "Why should I die for your husband's gold? Why should I not leave you here and vanish? The rocks know me. They do not know you." Evelyn felt a cold slap of reality. He was right. She was a burden, a liability. "You should," she said, lifting her chin, though her lip quivered. "Go, leave me. I never asked you to fight my war." Nokoni looked at her. He saw the bruise on her temple, the torn white silk, the dirt smeared on her cheek. But mostly, he saw the fire in her eyes. She was terrified, yet she stood straight. She offered him an escape that would cost her life. He cursed softly in his own tongue. "My cousin Chaska says all white people are the same," Nokoni said. "Eaters of the earth, liars." He stepped forward, bridging the distance between them. "But you are just meat for the wolves. Like us." He drew his knife, not to hurt her, but to cut a notch in the juniper branch, a marker. "We do not run anymore," Nokoni said. "Running makes us look like prey. We went to the high camp, to my brothers." "Will they help?" Evelyn asked. "They will want to kill you," Nokoni said with brutal honesty. "But it is better than the men behind us." The high camp was tucked into a natural amphitheater of stone, accessible only by a narrow, winding ledge that made Evelyn dizzy to look down. When they arrived, the sun was high and punishing. There were only 6 of them, a ragtag band of young men and a few women, remnants of a tribe that had been shattered by the cavalry. Tents were patched with mismatched hides. The horses looked lean. It was a place of survival, not glory. Their arrival caused an immediate commotion. Dogs barked, and 3 men rushed forward, weapons drawn. The leader of the group was a broad-shouldered man with a scar running through his eyebrow. This was Chaska. He looked from Nokoni to Evelyn, his face twisting into a sneer. "You bring a ghost to our fire. Nokoni," Chaska spat, gesturing with his rifle toward Evelyn's white dress. "Or did you bring a pet?" "I bring a guest," Nokoni said calmly, stepping between Evelyn and the rifle. "She is under my protection." "Protection," Chaska laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "We have no food. We have no powder for the guns. And you bring a mouth to feed a white mouth. She is hunted by the same men who hunt us," Nokoni argued. "Silas Greeley, the man who fenced off the buffalo water." "Greeley," Chaska said the name like a curse. He stepped closer to Evelyn, invading her space. He smelled of old smoke and aggression. He reached out and grabbed a lock of her hair. Evelyn flinched but did not pull away. Fine hair, soft hands. She is worth money. "Nokoni, or rifles. We trade her back. Greeley will give us 3 crates of repeating rifles for her." "No!" Evelyn cried out. "He will kill me." "Then he kills you." Chaska shrugged, releasing her hair with a shove. "What is that to me? Your people killed my mother. Your people killed the buffalo. Why should I care if one white woman dies?" "Because we are not traders of flesh," Nokoni shouted, shoving Chaska back. The other men tensed, hands hovering over knives. "That is the white man's way. Chaska selling people for land, selling people for metal. If we do this, we are no better than them. We are just Greeley with darker skin." The camp went silent. The accusation hung in the hot air. Chaska glared at Nokoni, his chest heaving. "Honor does not fill bellies, cousin," Chaska hissed. "But fine, keep her. But she eats only what she catches. And when the bluecoats come looking for her, you bleed for her alone." He turned and stalked away. Evelyn let out a shaky breath. She was safe, but she was an outcast. She sat near the edge of the camp, pulling her knees to her chest, watching the hostile glares of the women who were grinding corn nearby. The test came sooner than expected. That evening, as the sun began to set, a sudden chaos erupted near the corral. A rattlesnake had spooked the horses. In the frenzy, 2 of the ponies broke through the flimsy fence and trampled through the area where the band kept their meager supplies. Baskets were overturned. The precious supply of dried meat jerky that was meant to last them the month was scattered into the dirt and dust. The women wailed, throwing their hands up. Chaska stormed out, kicking at the dust in frustration. Ruined. It is all ruined. We will starve before the moon turns. Evelyn watched them staring helplessly at the meat coated in sand and horse manure. They saw garbage. She saw a problem she knew how to solve. She stood up and walked into the middle of the chaos. "Stop," she said loudly. Chaska turned on her. "Go away, white woman. This is your bad luck." "It is not bad luck, and it is not ruined," Evelyn said, her voice finding the steel tone she had used to manage the farm workers back in Missouri when her father was too drunk to give orders. "Get me water, and the large boiling pot." "You want to boil dirt," a woman sneered. "I want to save your winter," Evelyn snapped. "The meat is cured. The dirt is on the surface. We boil it to lift the grit, skim the fat, and dry it again immediately by the fire. It will be tough, but it will be edible. Or you can sit here and cry and starve. Which do you choose?" The women looked at Chaska. He stared at Evelyn, surprised by the authority in her voice. He gave a curt nod. For the next 4 hours, Evelyn worked. She pinned up her tattered sleeves and directed the operation. She showed them how to wash the strips without waterlogging them, and how to rig the drying racks closer to the smoke to keep the flies off. She worked until her hands were raw and her face was streaked with soot. As they were finishing, a young boy, no older than 7, came running with a bleeding shin. He had been kicked by one of the panicked ponies. The wound was deep and jagged, coated in the filth of the corral. The mother, a woman named Pawa, looked terrified. She reached for a pouch of chanting stones. "No," Evelyn said gently, stepping in. "The stones are good for the spirit, but the wound needs cleaning." She reached into the satchel Martha had given her. She pulled out a small bottle of carbolic acid and a clean strip of linen. "This will sting," she told the boy, pantomiming the pain. She cleaned the wound with the efficiency of a doctor, stitching the skin with a needle from her sewing kit and a thread of sinew provided by Nokoni. She bound it tightly to stop the bleeding. When she finished, the boy stopped crying. Pawa looked at the bandage, then at Evelyn. She did not smile, but she reached out and touched Evelyn's shoulder. "You have good hands," Pawa said in broken English. It was a peace offering. Nokoni watched from the shadows, a strange look on his face. It was pride. Later that night, the council fire was lit. The atmosphere had shifted. Evelyn was allowed to sit in the circle, though still on the periphery. "The men with rifles are at the canyon mouth," a scout reported. "They wait for morning to come up the trail." "We must run," Chaska said. "We go north." "They will follow," Nokoni said. "They have a tracker, and they have horses that eat grain, not grass. They are faster." "Then we fight," another warrior said. "We ambush them." "They have 20 guns." Nokoni countered. "We have 5. We die." Silence fell. It seemed there were no options left. Evelyn stood up. The firelight cast her shadow long against the rock wall. "You do not run," she said. "And you do not fight them here." All eyes turned to her. "We go to Red Hollow," she said. Chaska laughed. "She is mad. She wants to lead us into the cage." "No," Evelyn said, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. "Silas Greeley relies on shadows. He relies on lies. He told the town you kidnapped me. If I am found dead, he wins. If I am found running, he wins. But if I walk into that town, alive, unbound, standing beside you, his lie breaks." She pulled the papers from her pocket again. "I have proof of his crimes, not just against me, but against the law. He is defrauding the government and the railroad. If I give this to the sheriff, nothing happens. Miller is his man. But if I give this to the town, to the reverend, to the railroad investors who are arriving for the wedding." She looked at Nokoni. "He fears exposure more than he fears arrows. He is a coward who hides behind money. We strip him naked." Nokoni stood up. He looked at Chaska. "She is right," Nokoni said. "We have been fighting the white men with bows against cannons. We lose every time. Tonight, we will fight them with their own weapons. The truth." "It is suicide," Chaska grumbled. "Walking into the town. It is the only way to stop the hunt," Nokoni said. "If we expose him, the sheriff has to arrest him or face the federal marshals. The posse will have no one to pay them." He turned to Evelyn. "Can you do this? Can you stand before the man who wants to kill you and speak?" Evelyn thought of the cold touch of Silas's hand. She thought of the virgin bride he had bought. That girl was dead. She had died in the ravine. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I can—" Nokoni nodded. "Then we ride at dawn. Not away from the enemy, but to his throat." The plan was set. It was a gamble of the highest order. They were not just fighting for their lives. They were fighting to rewrite the story that had been forced upon them. The rising action had reached its peak. There was no turning back now. The church bell of Red Hollow tolled with a rhythmic, mournful clanging that seemed to vibrate through the dry heat of the Sunday morning. It was a sound meant to summon the faithful, but today it felt more like a summons to a theatrical performance. Inside the small, whitewashed structure, the air was stifling, thick with the scent of beeswax candles, stale perspiration, and the lavender water used by the ladies of the town. Every pew was filled. The men wore their Sunday suits, uncomfortable and stiff-collared. The women fanned themselves with grim determination. At the front of the congregation, sitting in the place of honor usually reserved for the grieving, was Silas Greeley. He looked every inch the tragic figure. His head was bowed, his hands clasped tightly over a Bible. He had not shaved in 2 days, a calculated bit of negligence designed to show the depth of his despair. Reverend Thomas stood at the pulpit, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. He cleared his throat, his voice booming out over the hushed crowd. "We gather today in the shadow of a great evil," the Reverend intoned. "A daughter of civilization, snatched from our very midst by the hands of savagery. A bride, pure and innocent, taken into the wilderness. We pray for Evelyn Hart. We pray for her soul, and we pray for the strength of Mr. Greeley, who bears this burden with the patience of Job." Silas let out a heavy, audible sigh. A ripple of sympathy moved through the room. "Lord," the Reverend continued, raising his hands, "guide the sheriff and his men. Let your justice be swift. Let the sword of righteousness strike down the heathens who have defiled this community." Outside, the world was silent, save for the wind. But behind the livery stable, in the long shadows cast by the midday sun, 2 figures moved with the silent grace of predators. Evelyn Hart pressed her back against the rough wood of the stable wall. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to drown out the church service. She looked nothing like the girl who had arrived in the stagecoach a week ago. Her white wedding dress was gone, replaced by a tunic of soft buckskin and a skirt she had fashioned from the ruined silk, now stained red with the dust of the canyon. On her wrist, she wore a leather band braided with hawk feathers, a gift from Nokoni. Her hair was loose, tangled by the wind, and her face was bronzed by the sun. Nokoni stood beside her. He had painted a single stripe of red ochre across his cheekbone. He carried his bow, but his rifle was slung across his back. He looked at the church, his expression unreadable. "Are you ready?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, meant only for her. Evelyn looked at the closed doors of the church. Beyond them lay the man who wanted to kill her and the society that had sold her. "Yes," she whispered. She reached into her pouch and touched the folded papers, the evidence of Silas's treachery. "Let us finish this." Nokoni signaled to the ridgeline far behind the town. Nothing moved there, but Evelyn knew that Chaska and 4 other warriors were waiting, hidden in the scrub, watching through the sights of their rifles. They were the insurance policy Nokoni had insisted upon. They moved toward the church, slipping through the alleyway between the general store and the saloon. The town was empty. Everyone was inside, listening to the sermon. They reached the heavy double doors of the church. Inside, the Reverend was building to a crescendo. "Let us purge this land of the darkness. Let us reclaim what is ours." Evelyn looked at Nokoni. He nodded once. Together, they pushed the doors open, the hinges groaned, and the heavy wood slammed against the interior walls with a sound like a thunderclap. A shaft of blinding white sunlight cut through the dim interior, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The Reverend stopped mid-sentence. Every head in the congregation turned. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Silas Greeley stood up slowly, turning around. For a second, just one heartbeat. His face showed pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw went slack, but then the mask slammed back into place. Evelyn stepped across the threshold. She did not lower her eyes. She walked with a stride she had learned on the canyon floor, steady, grounded, and unafraid. Noconi walked a step behind her and to the right, his hand resting casually near the knife at his belt. "Evelyn," Silas said, his voice trembling with feigned relief. "My dear God, you are alive." He took a step toward her, opening his arms. "You escaped them. Oh, the Lord is good." "Stay back," Evelyn said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the clarity of a bell. Silas froze. The smile faltered on his lips. "I did not escape them." "Silas," Evelyn said, walking further down the center aisle. The congregation shrank back from her as if she were carrying a plague. They looked from her to the tall, silent Comanche warrior at her side with wide, fearful eyes. "Because I was never taken." "She is in shock," Silas shouted, looking at the sheriff who was standing near the front row. "Sheriff, help her! She's been through an ordeal. The savage has her mind twisted." Sheriff Miller stepped out, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "Miss Hart, you step away from that Indian. Come here to Mr. Greeley." "No," Evelyn said firmly. She reached into her tunic and pulled out the sheaf of papers. She held them up high. "I ran away. Sheriff, I ran away because on the night before the wedding, I heard this man planning my murder." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the pews. "Lies!" Silas roared, his face turning a mottled red. "The heat has maddened her." "Is it a lie that you have already sold my father's land to the Union Pacific?" Evelyn challenged, turning to face the crowd. "Is it a lie that you hold a deed of transfer dated for next week? Is it a lie that you told your lawyer that a tragic accident would befall me within 3 years, just like your second wife?" She threw the papers onto the floor in front of the pews. "Read it. It is all there. The bribed coroner's report. The railroad contracts. He did not want a wife. He wanted a victim." The mayor, a small man in the second row, leaned forward and picked up one of the papers. He adjusted his spectacles, reading the bold script. His eyes widened. He looked up at Silas, then back at the paper. This is the Union Pacific letterhead," the mayor stammered. "It discusses the Greeley obstacle being removed." The mood in the room shifted. It was a physical thing, like the drop in pressure before a tornado. The townspeople looked at Silas. The pity was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified suspicion. Silas Greeley looked around the room. He saw his control slipping away like sand through an open hand. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the men he had bought and the judgment in the eyes of the women. He decided to burn it all down. "You listen to a woman who smells of a savage's bed," Silas screamed, his voice cracking. He pointed a shaking finger at Evelyn. "Look at her. Look at her dress. She is a whore. She ran off to lay with animals in the dirt. She is soiled goods." He turned his venom on the town. "I tried to bring civilization here. I tried to make this town rich. And you listen to this traitor to her race." He lunged for the sheriff's holster. It was a move born of desperation. He ripped the heavy Colt revolver from Miller's belt before the surprised lawman could react. "I will save this town from its own stupidity," Silas bellowed. He raised the gun, aiming not at Evelyn, but at Noconi. "Die, you red devil!" "No!" Evelyn screamed. The events of the next 5 seconds happened in a blur of violence. Noconi moved with terrifying speed. He did not reach for his bow. He shoved Evelyn hard to the side, sending her sprawling into the nearest pew, out of the line of fire. Silas fired. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet tore through the sleeve of Noconi's shirt, grazing his arm, and embedded itself in the wooden cross hanging behind the pulpit. Women screamed. Men scrambled for cover. At the church entrance, the doors were kicked wider. Conrad Hales, Silas's gunman, had been standing on the porch. Hearing the shot, he burst in, his own gun drawn. "Boss!" Conrad shouted. He saw Nokoni regaining his balance. Conrad raised his pistol, but from the ridge outside, a sharp crack echoed the distinct sound of a buffalo rifle. A bullet shattered the stained glass window high above the altar, showering the choir loft in colored shards. It was a warning shot from Chaska. Nokoni drew his knife, crouching low. Conrad panicked. The warning shot had thrown off his aim. He fired wildly into the nave, trying to hit the moving target of the Comanche warrior. Silas Greeley, blinded by rage, was trying to cock the sheriff's gun for a second shot. He stepped forward, right into the path of Conrad's wild fire. The bullet struck Silas in the chest. It was a dull, wet sound. Silas froze. He looked down at his gray vest, where a bloom of dark crimson was rapidly spreading. He looked up at Conrad, his eyes filled with absolute confusion. "You," Silas wheezed. He dropped the gun. His knees buckled. He fell forward, hitting the floorboards with a heavy thud, landing amidst the scattered papers that proved his guilt. Conrad Hales stared at his employer's body, the smoking gun still in his hand. "Drop it!" Sheriff Miller shouted. Finally, finding his courage, he drew his backup piece from an ankle holster and leveled it at Conrad. "Drop the gun! Hales!" Conrad looked at the sheriff, then at Nokoni, who had risen and was standing over Evelyn, his knife ready. Conrad realized the game was over. He let his revolver clatter to the floor and raised his hands. Silence descended on the church. It was heavy, ringing silence, broken only by the whimpering of the reverend who was cowering behind the altar. Evelyn pushed herself up. She brushed the hair from her face. She looked at the body of the man who had been her nightmare. He looked small now, just a heap of expensive clothes and failed ambition. She turned to look for Nokoni. He was standing beside her, blood trickling down his arm where Silas's bullet had grazed him. He did not look at the dead man. He looked only at her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice calm amidst the carnage. "No," Evelyn whispered. Sheriff Miller holstered his weapon. He looked at the body of Silas, then at the mayor, and finally at Evelyn. He looked tired. The illusion of order had been shattered, and the messy truth was lying on the floor. "He is dead," the sheriff announced unnecessarily. He looked at Evelyn with a mixture of shame and exhaustion. "The papers, if they are real, Miss Hart, then it was self-defense, or an accident of justice." The townspeople began to emerge from behind the pews. They looked at Evelyn differently now. The judgment was still there in some eyes, the deep-seated prejudice against the man standing beside her, but there was also awe. She had walked into the lion's den and brought the walls down. "Evelyn," the reverend said, standing up and smoothing his robes. "Child, it is over. You can come back to us now. We will find you a place. A boarding house. You can return to Missouri." It was an offer of amnesty, an offer to return to the fold of white society, provided she scrubbed the dust off and forgot the wilderness. Evelyn looked at the reverend. She looked at the faces of the women who had whispered about her, the men who had been ready to hunt her down for $500. Then she looked at the open church doors, framing the vast, red horizon. She turned to Nokoni. He stood apart, an island in the hostile sea of the town. He expected her to leave him. He had done his duty. He had delivered her to safety. His eyes were guarded, prepared for the rejection. Evelyn reached out, in front of the reverend, in front of the sheriff, in front of the entire scandalized town of Red Hollow. She took Nokoni's hand, his fingers interlaced with hers. His grip was warm, rough, and real. "No, Reverend," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, ringing off the rafters. "I am not going back to Missouri, and I am not staying in Red Hollow." She looked down at the dead man one last time. "He tried to own me. He tried to kill me. And you all watched and prayed for his success because he had money." She squeezed Nokoni's hand, and he stepped closer to her, a united front. "I was not kidnapped," Evelyn declared. "I was saved. I chose him, and I choose not to live one more day under the roof of your hypocrisy." She turned her back on the altar. "Come, no Coney. Let us go home." A gasp went through the room, a sound of scandal so profound it sucked the air from the church. A white woman, choosing a Comanche warrior over her own people. It was unheard of. It was blasphemy, but no one moved to stop them. The sheriff looked at Conrad Hales being handcuffed by the deputy. He looked at the dead tycoon. He looked at the riflemen he knew were watching from the hills. "Let them go," Sheriff Miller said quietly. Evelyn and Noconi walked down the center aisle. The sea of people parted for them. They walked out of the dim, suffocating church and into the blinding brightness of the afternoon sun. As they stepped onto the porch, Evelyn took a deep breath. The air tasted of dust and sage, but for the first time, it did not taste of fear. It tasted of freedom. Noconi looked at her, and a slow, rare smile touched his lips. He did not say a word, but he did not have to. He squeezed her hand tight. Behind them, the town of Red Hollow was left to bury its dead and its secrets. Ahead of them lay the open prairie, shimmering in the heat, wild and dangerous and beautiful. They walked toward the horses tethered behind the stable, leaving the noise of civilization behind, stepping into the silence of the land that now belonged to them both. The dust that hung over Red Hollow began to settle, but the silence that followed the gunshot was heavier than the heat. The body of Silas Greeley had been covered with a horse blanket and carried into the back room of the sheriff's office, leaving a dark stain on the church floorboards that no amount of scrubbing would ever truly erase. Outside, on the porch of the general store where the townspeople had congregated, the mood was fractured. The town, once united by the singular will and money of one man, was now broken into jagged shards of opinion. Evelyn Hart stood by the water trough near the livery stable, splashing cool water onto her face. She felt the eyes of the town on her back. They were not kind eyes, but they were no longer predatory. They were confused. "She is a traitor to her own kind," a woman in a silk bonnet whispered loudly to her neighbor. "Running off with a savage. And look at her, dressed in skins like a squaw. It is indecent." But a few feet away, a weather-beaten farmer named Josiah, who had lost half his land to Silas's bank foreclosure the previous winter, spat into the dirt and muttered. "She stood up to Greeley. That is more than any man here did. If Greeley was swindling the railroad like she says, then she did us all a favor." The divide cut right through the heart of Red Hollow. The wealthy merchants and the church elders looked at Evelyn with disdain, seeing the collapse of their social order. But the laborers, the debt-ridden ranchers, and the silent wives who had suffered under the heavy hands of their own husbands looked at her with a quiet, terrified awe. She had broken the rules, and the sky had not fallen, only the tyrant had. Sheriff Miller emerged from his office. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. He adjusted his hat, walked across the dusty street, and stopped a few feet from where Evelyn and Noconi stood. Noconi did not move his hand to his knife, but his stance shifted. "Ready?" "Relax, son," Miller said, his voice weary. "The shooting is done." He turned his gaze to Evelyn. "I read the papers you threw on the floor, Miss Hart, and I found the ledger in Greeley's pocket. It matches." He took a deep breath, looking around at the gathering crowd. He knew his position hung by a thread. The railroad investors were coming. If they found a town in chaos, governed by a sheriff who had aided a criminal, he would be finished. Silas Greeley died as a result of an accidental discharge during a confrontation he initiated, the sheriff declared loudly, his voice carrying to the onlookers. He drew a weapon on an unarmed woman and her escort. It was self-defense. The case is closed. It was a lie, or at least a generous bending of the truth, but it was the only way to keep the federal marshals from tearing the town apart. "And what of her?" the Reverend asked, stepping out onto the church steps, clutching his Bible as if it were a shield. "She has abandoned her station. She consorts with the heathen. She is a free woman." "Reverend," the sheriff said flatly, "and unless you have a warrant for her arrest that I do not know about, she is free to go." Miller turned back to Evelyn, lowering his voice. "But you cannot stay here. Evelyn, the town is split. Half of them might buy you a drink, but the other half might burn your bed while you sleep. And him?" He nodded at Nokoni. "His presence here is a match in a powder keg. I cannot guarantee his safety once the sun goes down and the whiskey starts flowing." "We do not intend to stay," Nokoni said. His English was crisp, startling the sheriff. "We only came for the truth." "Then take your truth and go," Miller said. "I will keep the bounty hunters off your trail. I will tell them the Comanches have moved north to the Staked Plains. But you must stay away from Red Hollow. If I see you within 10 miles of this town again, I will not be able to look the other way." "We have a deal," Nokoni said. As they prepared to saddle the horses, Silas's fine thoroughbreds, which Evelyn had claimed by right of survival, a movement in the crowd, caught Evelyn's eye. Martha, the old housekeeper from the ranch, pushed her way through the knot of gossiping women. She walked with a slow, deliberate gait. She stopped in front of Evelyn. She did not bow, and she did not smile. She simply looked Evelyn up and down, seeing the buckskin, the braided hair, the dirt, and the strength. "You got out," Martha said softly. "I did," Evelyn replied. "Thanks to you. I only opened the gate. Child, you were the one who rode through it." Martha reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She pressed it into Evelyn's hand. "Dried apples, and a tin of salve for that burn on your arm. It is not much." "It is everything," Evelyn said, her throat tight. Behind Martha, 2 other women stepped forward tentatively. One was the baker's wife, a woman who often sported bruises on her arms. She didn't say a word, but she placed a small sewing kit on the saddlebag. Another woman, young and poor, dropped a bag of cornmeal near Nokoni's feet before scurrying away. It was a silent offering, a quiet acknowledgement from the women of Red Hollow that Evelyn had fought a battle they all dreamed of fighting. They could not follow her. They had children, debts, and fears that anchored them, but they would not let her leave empty-handed. Evelyn mounted the horse. She sat tall in the saddle. She was not the terrified girl who had fled in the moonlight in a wedding dress. She was a woman who had faced death and walked away with her soul intact. Nokoni swung onto his paint horse with fluid grace. He looked at the sheriff, then at the silent crowd. He raised his hand in a single, stoic gesture of farewell, not a wave, but a signal that the debt was paid. "Let us ride," Nokoni said. They turned their horses toward the west, toward the sun that was beginning its long descent. They did not gallop. They walked their horses through the main street of Red Hollow, heads high, under the gaze of the people who had tried to define them. As they passed the last building, the Undertaker's, where Silas's body now lay, Evelyn did not look back. The town faded into the dust behind them, a cluster of wooden boxes that held small lives and big lies. Ahead lay the prairie, for the first time since her arrival in the New Mexico territory. The landscape did not look hostile to Evelyn. The red earth, which had once seemed like a barren wasteland, now glowed with the vibrant color of life. The heat was not oppressive. It was an embrace. The wind did not bite. It sang. Nature had ceased to be the enemy. It had become her accomplice. They rode in silence for a long time, putting miles between themselves and the laws of white men, when the town was nothing more than a smudge of smoke on the horizon. Nokoni slowed his horse and moved closer to hers. He did not speak, but his presence was a steady warmth at her side. "Where will we go?" Evelyn asked, watching a hawk circle high above in the blue vastness. "Your cousin Chaska. He will not want me at the high camp." "Chaska respects strength," Nokoni said. "You walked into the lion's mouth and pulled out its teeth. He will not turn you away, but the high camp is a place of war. It is a place of hiding." He looked at her, his dark eyes softening. "You are not a woman for hiding, Evelyn, and I am tired of running." "Then where?" "There is a valley," Nokoni said. 2 days' ride from here. It is too rocky for the cattlemen to want it. It is too close to the white settlements for the reservation agents to claim it. It sits in the middle, like us." "A gray place," Evelyn mused. "A free place," Nokoni corrected. The valley was a slash of green in the red rock wilderness, fed by a deep, spring-fed creek that ran cold even in the height of summer. Cottonwood trees lined the water, their leaves shimmering like silver coins in the breeze. They were not alone for long. Chaska and the small band of renegades arrived a day later. Having watched the events in Red Hollow from the ridges, Chaska rode up to where Evelyn was uncinching her saddle. He looked at her, his face grim and scarred. Evelyn braced herself for an insult, for a demand that she leave. Instead, Chaska reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a heavy iron skillet, something he must have liberated from a wagon train or a farmhouse years ago. He dropped it in the dirt at her feet. "For the meat," Chaska grunted. "Boiled beef tastes like wet dog." It was the closest thing to an apology, or a welcome, that a Comanche war leader would ever give. And so, the work began. They decided to build not a camp, but a home. It was an act of defiance. To build something permanent in a land that shifted hands like poker chips was a statement that they intended to stay. Nokoni and 2 other young warriors felled the timber, dragging the heavy pine logs down from the higher slopes. Evelyn stripped the bark, her hands blistering and then hardening, turning from the soft white hands of a merchant's daughter into the capable hands of a pioneer. They built the structure near the bend of the creek. It was a hybrid thing, born of 2 minds. The foundation and walls were of notched logs, solid and square in the manner of the white settlers, strong enough to stop a bullet or a winter gale. But the roof was different. Instead of heavy shingles, they used a framework of poles covered with layers of sod and cured hides, peaked to let the smoke rise, in the style of a Comanche lodge. It was a house that belonged to neither world, and therefore, it belonged perfectly to them. Evelyn learned to mix the mud for the chinking between the logs. She stood knee-deep in the creek, stomping the clay with straw, laughing when Nokoni splashed her. She learned to scrape hides, the smell pungent and sharp, until the leather was soft as velvet. She learned the Comanche words for water, fire, horse, and love. "Pa," Nokoni said, handing her a ladle of water. "Pa," Evelyn repeated, drinking. "Kuna," he said, pointing to the fire. "Kuna." One afternoon, as she was helping lift a heavy beam for the doorframe, Evelyn paused to wipe sweat from her brow. She looked at her hands. They were brown from the sun, calloused and scarred from a slip with a knife. Her fingernails were short and broken. 3 months ago, she would have wept at the sight of them. She would have tried to hide them in gloves. Now, she clenched her fist and felt the strength in her forearm. These were hands that had built a wall. These were hands that had held a dying man's gaze and told the truth. These were hands that had touched a warrior in the dark and claimed him. She looked up to see Nokoni watching her from the roof. He had stopped hammering. He was just looking at her, a look of profound, quiet adoration. He slid down the poles and landed lightly beside her. He took her rough, dirty hand in his and turned it over, tracing the calluses with his thumb. "They are not pretty anymore," Evelyn said, half joking. "They are beautiful," Nokoni said seriously. "Smooth hands are for dolls. These are the hands of a woman who holds up the sky." He leaned in and kissed her, right there in the open, under the midday sun. It was not the desperate kiss of the storm, nor the defiant hand-holding of the church. It was a kiss of domesticity, of shared labor and shared life. It tasted of salt and promise. "The roof is finished," Nokoni said against her lips. "And the door is hung," Evelyn replied. "Then tonight," he whispered, "we sleep inside." That evening, they moved their furs into the cabin. It smelled of raw pine and fresh earth. It was empty of furniture, save for a bed frame Nokoni had lashed together from willow branches. But as the sun went down and the moonlight streamed through the open window, painting the floor in silver, it felt fuller than the mansion at the Double G Ranch ever had. They built a small fire in the stone hearth Evelyn had stacked herself. The smoke drifted up through the smoke hole, carrying their prayers to the stars. "This is the middle place," Nokoni said, sitting beside her and watching the flames. "The white men will draw lines on maps. They will say this is theirs, or that is theirs. But as long as this fire burns, this ground is ours. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder. They will come back. You know, the railroad, the settlers. The world is getting smaller. I know, Nokoni said. But we are not small. Evelyn, we have lived through the fire. Let them come. We will be here. The falling action had brought them from the chaos of the church to the quiet of the valley. The adrenaline of survival had been replaced by the rhythm of living. The old order, Silas's tyranny, the town's judgment, the rigid lines between races had been dismantled. In its place, they had built a sanctuary of logs and leather, a fragile but stubborn fortress against the changing world. Evelyn closed her eyes, listening to the creek bubbling outside and the steady breathing of the man she loved. For the first time, the silence was not waiting to be filled with fear. It was just peace. The autumn wind moving through the valley had a different bite to it than the summer gales. It was crisp, smelling of turning leaves and pine resin, signaling that the season of burning heat had finally broken. High on a limestone bluff overlooking the creek, the air was still. This was a sacred place, a point where the earth seemed to lift itself up to meet the endless expanse of the blue sky. Evelyn Hart stood near the edge, the wind tugging gently at her skirt. She was not wearing the heavy silks of St. Louis, nor the tattered remains of the dress she had fled in. She wore a tunic of soft, smoked buckskin, sewn by the women of Nokoni's band, and dyed a warm ochre with walnut shells. But around her waist, braided into the leather sash that cinched the tunic, was a strip of delicate white lace, a remnant she had salvaged from the wedding dress. It was no longer a symbol of a transaction or a shackle. It was a scar of survival, worn proudly. Nokoni stood facing her. He held a small clay pot of paint in one hand. In the old way, Nokoni said, his voice low and reverent. We do not sign papers. Paper can burn. Paper can lie. We make the promise to the spirit that lives in the blood. He dipped his thumb into the pot. The paint was red, made from fat and hematite. Red is for life, he whispered, for the blood that beats in the heart, for the fire that keeps the winter away. He reached out and traced a line down the center of Evelyn's forehead, then across her cheekbones. The paint was cool against her skin, but his touch was warm. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settling into her bones. She was not being given away by a father. She was not being purchased by a husband. She was standing on a cliff edge, choosing to step forward. And black, Nokoni said, dipping a finger into a second pot containing charcoal mixed with oil. Black is for the shadow that hides us, for protection against the wolf and the storm. He marked her chin and the backs of her hands. Then, he handed the pots to her. Evelyn took them. She dipped her own thumb into the red paint. Her hand did not tremble. She reached up to Nokoni's face, tracing the same lines he had drawn on her. She felt the roughness of his skin, the sharp angle of his jaw. I choose your life, she said, her voice steady in the silence of the canyon. And I choose your shadow. There was no priest to bless them, no choir to sing. The witnesses were Chaska, standing stoically with his arms crossed a few yards away. Pawa, the woman whose son Evelyn had healed, holding a bundle of sage, and Martha, who had ridden out from Red Hollow a week prior to check on her girl and decided to stay for the day. Nokoni pulled a small object from his pouch. It was a bracelet braided from buffalo hide, adorned with a single, perfect eagle feather and 3 beads of blue turquoise. The eagle sees all, he said, tying it around her wrist. And the stone is the color of the sky that covers us both. Evelyn reached into her pocket. She did not have turquoise, but she had spent the last week working with a hammer and a scrap of silver coin she had found in her old satchel. She had beaten it flat, polished it with sand until it shone, and bent it into a simple, open cuff. She took Nokoni's wrist, the wrist that had drawn a bow to protect her, the wrist that had held her through the storm, and slipped the silver cuff onto it. Silver is from the earth, she said. It endures the fire and comes out stronger. Like us. Nokoni looked at the silver band, then at her. He leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. "No more running. Evelyn, today, we planted the stake. No more running," she whispered back. Behind them, Martha wiped a tear from her cheek with the corner of her apron. "Lord have mercy," she murmured. "It is not a church wedding, but I have never seen two people look more married in my life." The weeks that followed brought a rhythm of peace that Evelyn had never known existed. The cabin they had built was sturdy, the mud chinking drying hard as stone. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a signal fire of domesticity in the wilderness. One evening, by the light of a tallow candle, Evelyn sat at the rough-hewn table. A piece of parchment lay before her expensive papers she had taken from the ranch, the last vestige of the resources Silas Greeley had unwittingly provided her. She dipped a steel pen into the inkwell. "Dearest Mother, I know you have likely heard terrible things. You have heard that I was kidnapped, or that I am lost. You have heard that Silas Greeley is dead. I am writing to tell you that the truth is both simpler and more complicated than the rumors. Silas Greeley intended to kill me. Mother, he needed my death to secure the deed to your land and to satisfy the railroad investors. He was a monster disguised as a savior. He is dead now, and I am alive. I cannot come back to Missouri. The girl who left St. Louis is gone, but the woman who remains is strong. I am sending a bank draft with this letter money that was found in Silas's safe, which the sheriff quietly admitted was owed to me as compensation for the fraud. It should be enough to pay off Father's creditors. Do not worry about my soul. I have found a church that has no walls. I have found a man who does not want to own me, but to walk beside me. I hope, one day, you can understand that honor is not about doing what you are told, but about doing what is true. Your daughter, Evelyn." She folded the letter and sealed it with wax. Handing it to a passing trader the next day felt like cutting the final thread of a heavy tapestry that had been smothering her. She watched the rider disappear toward the east, carrying her past away, leaving her standing firmly in her present. The valley did not stay empty. The story of the white squaw and the Comanche warrior who had defied a tyrant spread through the territory. It was a scandalous story to some, but to others, the outcasts, the broken, the weary, it sounded like a beacon. First came Sarah, a widow from Red Hollow whose husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with 2 young children and no way to feed them. She arrived in a rickety wagon, looking terrified, asking if there was work. Evelyn did not turn her away. "We need a garden," Evelyn told her. "If you can make things grow in this dirt, you have a place at the table." Then came Thomas, a cowboy who had ridden with Silas's outfit but had thrown down his gun when ordered to shoot at the Indians. He was a quiet man with a limp, who wanted nothing more than to tend horses and be left alone. Noconi was wary at first. He watched them with the eyes of a hawk guarding a nest. "They are white," Noconi said one night as they lay in the dark cabin. "White men bring fences." "Not these ones," Evelyn replied, resting her hand on his chest. "These are the ones the fences kept out. We are building something new, Noconi, a place for those who do not fit in the boxes the world made for them." They established a code, spoken around the communal fire pit. "No one owns the land," Noconi told the small group. "We use it, we honor it. If you cut a tree, you plant 2 seeds. If you kill a deer, you use every part. And you never, ever raise a hand against the Numunu who passed through here. This is their road as much as ours." It was a fragile experiment, a tiny island of cooperation in a sea of racial hatred. But it held. Sarah's children played with Chaska's nephews when the band visited. Thomas taught the young warriors how to shoe a horse, and they taught him how to track a cougar. Evelyn changed. The corset marks faded from her skin, replaced by the muscle definition of hard work. She stopped walking with the minced, careful steps of a lady and learned to stride with the purpose of a woman who has miles to cover. One night, late in November, the first snow began to fall. It dusted the red rocks with sugar, turning the valley into a monochromatic dreamscape. Evelyn and Noconi sat on the porch of their cabin, wrapped in buffalo robes, drinking coffee that was thick and bitter. "I used to wonder," Evelyn said softly, watching the snowflakes melt on the porch rail. What my life would have been if I had married him, if I had never heard of him that night. You would be dead, Nokoni said bluntly. He did not sugarcoat the world. Maybe, Evelyn agreed. Or maybe I would just be hollow, a shell walking around in silk dresses. She turned to look at him. The firelight from the window cast half his face in gold and half in shadow. He was so beautiful, it made her chest ache. They called me the Virgin Bride, she said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. It was all they cared about. My value was in what I had not done, in what was untouched. Nokoni reached out and took her hand. His thumb brushed over the silver bracelet she had made him, and then over the leather one on her wrist. The two materials, hide and metal, clinked together softly. They valued the wrapper, Nokoni said. They did not know the gift inside. You did, Evelyn whispered. That first night in the storm. You could have taken anything. You took nothing. I took your trust, Nokoni corrected. That is heavier than a body. A body is just flesh. Trust is the spirit. He leaned in, his eyes intense. I did not choose a virgin. Evelyn, I chose a warrior. I chose the woman who climbed out of a canyon with a broken ankle and refused to die. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, hot and sudden. I am a free woman, she said, testing the words. You are, Nokoni affirmed. And my heart is the country where you are free. He kissed her then. A deep, slow kiss that tasted of coffee and snow and forever. It was not the tentative exploration of their first night, nor the desperate affirmation of survival. It was a claim, a statement that they belonged to each other not by law, but by the gravity of their souls. The outside world did not forget them entirely. In the spring, a wagon arrived carrying 3 men in suits. They were surveyors for the railroad, holding maps and instruments of measurement. They looked at the valley with greedy eyes, seeing timber, water, and a grade suitable for track. Evelyn saw them from the garden. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the house to get a rifle. She did not load it, but she carried it in the crook of her arm. Nokoni came from the corral, mounting his paint horse. He rode to meet the wagon, Evelyn walking beside him. Good day, the lead surveyor said, eyeing Nokoni with distaste and Evelyn with confusion. We are scouting a spur line. This valley is unmarked on our maps. We need to assess the water rights. The water belongs to the creek, Evelyn said calmly, and the land belongs to itself. Miss, the surveyor said, adopting a patronizing tone. Eminent domain is a powerful thing. The railroad is coming. You cannot stop progress. We are not stopping progress, Nokoni said, his voice deep and vibrating with quiet menace. We are stopping you. Behind them, Thomas the cowboy stepped out of the barn, cleaning a shotgun. Sarah stood on the porch of her small cabin, holding a pitchfork. Chaska, who had been visiting, appeared on the ridgeline, silhouetted against the sun, his silhouette bristling with weapons. The surveyor looked around. He saw a white woman, a Comanche warrior, a crippled cowboy, and a widow standing in a line. It was a nonsensical army, but there was a look in their eyes, a collective resolve that made his stomach turn. This is private land, Evelyn said. It is home. Turn your wagon around? The surveyor hesitated. He looked at the map, then at the rifle in Evelyn's arm. He realized that whatever salary he was being paid, it was not enough to start a war with these people. We will mark it as unsuitable, the surveyor muttered. Too rocky. They turned the wagon and left. Evelyn watched them go. She knew they might come back. She knew the railroad was a hungry beast that rarely slept. But for today, the beast had blinked. They will bring lawyers next time, Nokoni said, watching the dust settle. Then we will fight them with lawyers, Evelyn said. I still have Silas's money, and I have a voice. The story ends on a quiet evening in high summer. The crickets were singing their deafening chorus in the tall grass. The air was thick with the scent of blooming sage and cooling earth. Evelyn and Nokoni sat on the steps of the cabin they had built together. Nokoni was sharpening a knife, the rhythmic shh sound blending with the night noises. Evelyn was mending a shirt, her silver bracelet catching the moonlight with every stitch. Far to the east, a faint glow illuminated the horizon. It was the gas lamps and electric lights of Red Hollow, a town that was growing, getting louder, getting brighter, pushing back the dark. To the west, high in the hills, a single orange point of light flickered, a Comanche campfire, burning in the old way. They sat in the middle, in the dark, quiet space between the two lights. Evelyn stopped sewing. She looked at the lights of the town, then at the fire on the hill. Then she looked at the man beside her. She had lost her family name. She had lost her status. She had lost the protection of her race. But she looked at the sturdy logs of her home. She heard the laughter of Sarah's children sleeping inside. She felt the solid warmth of Nokoni's shoulder against hers. She realized she had not lost anything. She had traded a cage for a world. "What are you thinking?" Nokoni asked, sensing her shift in mood. "I am thinking," Evelyn said, smiling, "that the view from here is perfect." Nokoni chuckled, a low sound in his throat. He put his arm around her, pulling her close. "It is a good view, but the company is better." Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. The two bracelets, the leather of the savage and the silver of the civilized, clinked together, a tiny bell chiming in the vast silence. The future was uncertain. The world was changing fast, and there would be more battles to fight. But for tonight, under the vast canopy of stars that covered the entire territory, regardless of who claimed to own it, Evelyn Hart was exactly where she was meant to be. She was not a virgin bride. She was not a victim. She was a woman who had ridden into the dark and found her own light. And that was enough. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Evelyn and Nokoni as much as I enjoyed writing it. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on their choices. If you enjoyed this journey and want to hear more tales from the frontier, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like the video and press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Your support keeps the campfire burning.